Do you know how important guitar strings are to the guitar? I think they're the engine that drives it. I know that most of us fantasize about having these fabulous, great guitars, and I'm lucky enough to have five Alan Carruth guitars that are, in fact, fabulous. But the thing that I've learned, especially over the last 5 years, is that strings matter. Strings are the engine. Strings, depending on the gauge that you use, that's vitally important because I've come to believe that certain guitars like a certain amount of tension on them. If you go too light, they don't project as well. They don't have the punch that they might have otherwise. And yet, if you overstring them and you can damage the top, sometimes it feels like they're all bound up if they're strung with too heavy a gauge and tuned too high. Um, but alloy also matters. When you think of it now, and there's some choices for guitarists, and really for under $10, you can have a great experiment by you know spend $50 or $60, and you can buy six or seven, maybe even 10 different types of strings with different alloys and different gauges, and really find out what your guitar likes the best. I'm lucky. All of my guitars like new tone strings. I have my own signature set through them with custom gauging. It's allowed me to really kind of look at the way that I use each guitar, the notes that I typically tune to, and I have been able to find specific gauging now that really allows my guitars to have tremendous playability and still use up to 13 or 14 tunings on each instrument. That's pretty cool. Um, let's first talk about tension. Um, Tension is what drives the top on a guitar, whether it's steel string or nylon string. And on a steel string guitar, diameter, the bigger the diameter, the more tension it's going to have if it's tuned to the same pitch. Um, a typical medium gauge set of steel string guitar strings that has a 13 for the first string and a 56 for the sixth is typically in the 185 to 187 pounds per tension pounds of tension along the top and neck. Um, Light gauge strings that typically go from either 12 to 53 in Diodario, 12 to 54 in a lot of GHS and others. Um, those typically come in at about 165 pounds per tension, but maybe as low as 163. And extra light gauge, which typically goes from an 11 to a 52, but can be different, will have a string tension that could be anywhere from the low 150s to 156, 157. Ultimately, what you're doing in going down a gauge, you're typically losing about 3 pounds of tension per string on per gauge. It's about 18 pounds difference, which might put the extra light gauge in the 140s. I've never been there before. I don't use those strings, so I don't really know. Here's what I think is important for those of you that use alternate tunings. It's really important to know what you're starting from. If you play in standard or drop D quite a bit, know what your string gauge is. A lot of you guys use light gauge strings. There's nothing wrong with that, but it means you're starting at about 165 to 167 pounds of tension. For every whole step that you go down on the guitar, you're losing 6 pounds of tension. If you go from standard tuning to DADGAD, you've lost 18 pounds of tension. You have gone from 187 to 169 pounds, which is in the high end of a light gauge string. If you then go from DADGAD to SIGGITY-GAD, you will have dropped 12 more pounds, and you will have gone down from 169 to 157, and you're in extra light land. And it's important to know that because how you attack the guitar is should change. If you hit it too hard with your right hand, you're going to bend that a 54 or a 53 when it's tuned down to C. It's just going to happen. Same thing might happen with a 56. So take a look, if you're using a lot of tunings, take a look at what they are and get a really good idea of the tension that your guitar likes. Right under here now I'm putting a link to a site that I use for string tension. All you have to do is punch in the string gauge and the pitch you want to tune it to and the scale length, and it will tell you the tension. It's good information to have. I use it a lot when I'm going through all of my string things. This is going to be long, and that's okay. The next thing I want to talk about is alloys. Over the course of my guitar playing, which is over 40 years, I have used a variety of alloys, from nickel to phosphor bronze. Nickel is about as kind of soft and lack of detail as you can have, as phosphor bronze has about the most. New tone strings for me are the only string that I really like the sound of the phosphor bronze, because the detail is tempered a bit. I find some of the other best-selling strings harsh especially in the high end, upper high end. When I attack it with my nails, the new tones don't do that. But you should try your own. You can. There's 80/20. There's different types of phosphor bronze. See what works for your attack. See what works for your style of play and on your guitar. Not all guitars are the same. If you have multiple guitars, you might end up finding that different brands of strings sound better on different guitars, and that's okay. Experiment, find out. The last thing to experiment with is the core. And we're kind of now getting into the esoteric part of it, but there are basically three types of cores that you can get. The oldest thing that's out there are round core strings. New Tone probably makes the finest, and DR also has a round core string out there. The trick with them, and Tomastic Infeld also, their Spectrum Bronze series are round core. The thing to remember is that before you snip them, make sure that you actually tune the guitar to pitch, stretch the strings out a little bit, because a round core string will actually get pulled through and destroy the string. It'll be useless if you cut it before it's tuned to pitch. But they have tremendous amount of sustain, and they seem to last longer than a hex core. A hex core is the most stable string. It's what I use because of all the different tunings that I use on the guitar. And then there's a company that a friend of mine, Randy Hughes, runs, that sells something called octa-core strings, and it's an 8-sided core, and it's really, really fabulous for if you want to get the round core sound and get hex core stability. I believe Al Petway plays those as well. So hope you've enjoyed this talk about strings. They're important. Experiment. Check out my website for music, for tablature, and more. Cheers.